Òttar Longport, Dublin, 902 AD. The Norsemen and the Norse Irish retreated behind the ramparts of the Longport, the D-shaped enclosure whose straight side was the black pool on the lower stretch of the River Poddle. The Norse longships were moored in this haven, and the Longport was designed to protect them from enemies such as those assailing Òttar that day. The screeching, spear-wielding Irish attacked in strength. The men of Brega, under Miel Fianna, united with the warriors of Leinster under Cerebral, son of Merchin, in driving back the Norse, whom they regarded as unwelcome foreigners. They had every right to detest the Norsemen, whose incursion to plunder silver, rare holy books, and young men and women to sell as slaves in the East they had endured for far too long. The fury of the Irish made no distinction between the Norsemen and the Norse-Irish traders, the latter who had adopted many of their customs and intermarried with the native Irish. On this day, every last foe was fodder for their blades. The wild whoops and war cries of the face-painted Irish resounded with triumph as they breached the defences of the Longport to pour into the compound. Jarl Òttar, chieftain of a strong group of Norse-Irish traders, looked on with dismay as he tried valiantly to regroup his men, many of whom carried wounds that limited their fighting efficiency. Near the entrance, under severe pressure, King Ivair, a direct descendant of Ivar the Boneless, with his grandsons close to him, sold every yard of soil at a high price. Still, and inevitably, the weight of the Irish numbers forced them backwards, step by step. Drawing near to their king, Òttar watched with horror as Ivar's grandson, Ragnall, failed to parry a thrust from a long pole of an Irish spear which passed under his shield and entered his flesh at the shoulder. Jarl Òttar carried 3 axes, his battle axe, which he transferred to his left hand, and 2 throwing axes tucked into his belt. The triumphant Irish spearman dropped the long-shafted weapon and, drawing his sword, closed in to slay the staggering Norse princeling. Pulling his throwing axe from his belt, at 10 paces from the screaming red-haired Irish warrior, and relying on years of practice, Òttar hurled his axe unerringly to bury the sharp-honed blade into the onrushing assailant's neck. Blood sprayed over his intended victim, already down on one knee and gazing gratefully at his saviour. Òttar rushed over to him, waving to his brother Braid to cover him as he pulled an arm of the wounded Ragnall over his shoulder and, turning to half carry, half drag the young warrior towards the ships, knowing them realistically to be the only hope of survival. Òttar's men, seeing his intention, came rushing from the defensive line to protect the short distance to the ships. They knew that this was the only hope of making good their escape too. King Ivair, grateful for his grandson's life, organised an orderly retreat to the boats, but the furious Irish compelled his men to fight every inch of the way. From the safety of his ship, Òttar reflected on the quick thinking that had allowed him to haul Ragnall on board. He gazed on in dismay as fleeing comrades who had been slower to escape met their doom. Luckily for the Norsemen, the Irish tribes did not favour longbows, arrows and javelins. Otherwise, the slaughter would have been far worse. He watched one man, slowed by the weight of a wounded comrade on his shoulder, fall to a spear planted in his back. Near him, another, bearing an injured companion, lowered him to the ground, stood over him with a raised axe and fought to a standstill with his last ounce of energy, preferring a glorious death and the embrace of the Valkyrie to being pierced by a spear jabbed from behind. The result was the same. His death.